right, here we go. And 3, 2. Hey, everybody. Welcome back to the Fly Fishing Insider Podcast. I'm your host, Christian Bacasa. Today, we've got Zeke Hersh on the line. Zeke, you and I have become friends, and you've got really great experience. And one of the things I love about your experience is how well-rounded you are in the saltwater and freshwater experience. That's number one. You've been fishing for 26 years. You lived in Sarasota, were part of some of the actual pioneering of some really interesting tarpon fishing. We're going to dive into that. But you've moved back, I would say, to the Colorado area, have been there in Breckenridge, fishing the Colorado River, et cetera, and really have become a true professional in the sport of fly fishing. So today we're going to jump into a couple things. One, first, I want to hear about this like Pyramid Lake style fly fishing for tarpon. That sounds incredible. And then two, we're going to cover how you fish the Colorado from a float trip scenario, which is a little bit different. And then the last section of the show, I'd like to dive into that dry dropper technique that you use. It's like a deep water dry dropper technique, and cover that as well in some detail so we can get people on the water giving that a go. So again, 26 years on the water, man, guiding, et cetera. You work for Trout's fly fishing out of Breckenridge and great shop, et cetera. Let's hear this scenario of the tarpon fishing from a ladder, jumping fish, hopping in a boat, whatever it was, and go from there.
Yeah, you bet. Mike Cosentino, a good buddy of mine who happened to be a brother of a friend of mine here in Breckenridge, who was snowboarding buddy, came out and was one of my first clients, just wanted to pay me to take him fly fishing for trout. And we got to talking, and I started visiting him in Florida. He's from Sarasota, Sarasota local, and started visiting and doing some fishing off his little skiff, and then visited a few more times. We started fishing out of canoes because you could get real close to the fish, and kayaks right off Turtle Beach. And then one day we got to talking, and he was like, man, I've been seeing these guys, fishing Pyramid Lake or other things with ladders. He's like, I think it'd be super cool to set these up on the sandbars in the passes and, anchor the boat, triangulate the ladders. If we all three can fish too. So, cause there was 3 of us usually on the boat, and like each look the different ways for fish, and then be able to, let people know if they're coming your way or whatnot, and each get shots. And literally, I'd say 15, 20 minutes into the first time that we did this, I had a big girl come my way and, jumped her. And it was insane. And then we just started, that little process started getting better and better using I think we were putting a clothes hamper on the front and making sure you had your poppy hat. And, if you jump one, you jump, your buddy's got the boat and you swung over and chased him down. Although Mike, I know, has landed fish off the ladder, believe it or not.
Oh, wow.
Super cool. I'd say the scariest part is one time we had a big old hammerhead cruising the sandbar, and we're on ladders. Yeah, like not really.
Please do not bump the ladder. Please don't bump the ladder.
Exactly. So really cool. And then now that's kind of morphed into, if you go to fish Sarasota, everybody's parking their anchoring their drift boats on those sandbars and looking for the fish to swim. So kind of pioneered what they're doing now in Sarasota in a way. And Mike's just the amazing guy. I mean, that guy would, jump tarpon, just anchored in his canoe, fishing poppers. He's one of those guys who just had the touch, the magic. So I learned a lot from him, and it's super cool. And then of course lived down there for a winter, and really, this is the time of year right now. My buddy called me the other day. He's like, "What? You don't love me? You're not visiting?" And I was like, "Man, I wish I could right now. It's so bad." Just because the new moon in June, which is like coming up, like I think it's this week, is amazing. So
they light up, huh?
Yeah, it's like the big tides. If you get the big tides, and I think you can have a good day on a full moon too, but those fish are probably eating at night. So we've always kind of steered to the new moon. So super cool. I mean, I was just talking about tarpon fishing the other day with a client, and just how amazing it is, especially seeing that eat and just presenting the fly, waiting for them to get close and doing a little strip, a little wiggle, and seeing their head turn, and then they come over and eat that thing. I don't know
Yeah,
if anything's better than that. So
it's pretty wild. I mean, they're a cautious fish, you know, and but then they had that total other side of aggression. So it's like this juxtaposed position that you don't know what you're going to get. And then when you get the beast to come out, you're like, "Oh my lord, what just happened out there?" And then there's that whole other element of now they're vulnerable, and you kind of
yeah,
touched on that with the hammerheads. It's like now I gotta put this thing, you know, I gotta put the metal to it, get it on my legs, and get that thing in, because if I don't, it's gonna get chomped.
yep,
So
yep,
yeah,
yep.
really
Yeah,
really wild fish.
they're one of the coolest species in my opinion. Just it's almost like uh, they have personality. It's just interesting. I don't even know how to explain it to people. When you see one eat and uh, or just look at your fly or just even see them, they're just an amazing species.
Yeah, and getting the good hook set is like it's so hard. I mean, that jaw is like brick, and uh, I don't know, man. I just love it. I can never forget the first time I hooked one. Never forget. It was with my buddy Ben. We were fishing under a mangrove, and there were birds in the tree, and the birds were pooping, and they would poop like seed or whatever, and the bait fish would come over and feed on it. This
Mhm.
thing would come out from the roots, feed on the bait fish, and then go back in. And it was about probably 75 pound, um, tarpon, and cast and cast. I mean, I had so many shots, because it was just so enamored with this bait, live bait. Couldn't get it to turn, couldn't get it to turn, and finally, changed the fly, and it was a black and orange cockroach. And I threw that thing in there, and all of a sudden, it was like it just came out, you know, kaboom, smashed that thing, and it was like having a pit bull on the end of your line that was fighting
Yeah,
for its life.
yeah,
And the jumps and all that, and my buddy and I are just like, oh my god, what is going on, and get it pretty close to the boat, and like almost leadering it, and it came unbuttoned. I was hurting inside for sure, but it was a hell of an adventure. Super cool.
yeah. If you want to see mayhem, that's when mayhem comes out. Whether it's the
Yeah,
fish jumping and going crazy, or watching your fly line and your toes, or your dog, or I can't tell you. I think one trip I like broke two rods, broke a reel, and then like three fly lines. It was
yeah,
insane. So
yeah.
yeah,
So,
just ready for the mayhem when you go tarpon fishing for
yeah, and
sure.
it was like my second saltwater trip ever.
Nice.
So it was like the first one was like, okay, let's try and get some bonefish and accomplish that and stuff. And then this one was like, all right, we're on. We're pros.
Yeah, exactly. And then you can go dry forever.
Right, right.
So, yeah,
That's
it's
cool.
one
Well,
of
let's
those.
jump into the Colorado fishing, because that's where you're at now, and that's your specialty out of the shop. By the way, what's how do they get a hold of you at the shop, etc.?
Yeah, Trout's Fly Fishing. We have a Denver shop and a Frisco shop. And you can get in touch with me at Zeke at troutsflyfishing.com. That's Zeke, at Trouts, Trouts, flyfishing.com. Or you can get me on my Instagram. I think it's at Zeke Hersh or at Ezekiel Hirsch. Yeah, and shoot me a message, email me. Yeah, that'd be
And
great.
that Denver shop is awesome.
Yeah,
I've been in there before. It's a great place. Like even a lot of people fly into Denver, right? Go get your gear, boom, go on to your destination. Sweet location. So you're now in Breck though. You guide in and around that area, but you have a specialty on the Colorado. So tell us a little bit about the floating of the Colorado and some of the techniques that you guys use there.
yeah, you bet. I mean, I just floated it yesterday. It's still it's high and it's a little off color, but it's fishing well. I mean, it's funny though, but I didn't see another boat out there, so I guess keep the secret quiet for a little while.
Yeah,
By the time this comes out, it'll be fine. But yeah, fishing. It fished well yesterday. The water just came up. So it was a little cold. So I don't think the fish were as active, but we boated double digits. I'm pretty happy with that kind of day. And, the Colorado's just a special river, and unfortunately, it's the last couple of years it's been super low and pretty tough. Like we've had to shut off the fishing for a month here and there in the middle of the summer. This year, I don't think we're going to have to deal with that. It's super nice to see the flows. We had a bunch of water this winter, so it's flushing the river.
Yeah.
Fish are healthy. Yesterday, all the fish we caught are super healthy, and
Yeah,
that's
just to catch everybody up, June 16th, 2023. So we came off a big winter.
yeah.
Yeah. So okay.
Yeah, so it's it's a special place for me. I've been floating it for I think I've been guiding 27 years, and then floating it for I don't know if I guess at 20, yeah, I'd say I'd been floating it for about 27 years. I think I started floating it right, maybe even a year before that. So before I started guiding, just a phenomenal fishery, even though it's underscored by a lot of people. I really like the wildness of it. I think we have I think I've done the mileage, over 100 miles of floatable trout fishing water.
Mm-hmm.
So pretty awesome in that respect. I mean, a lot of people stay up high, which is good. I've kind of quit doing that unless I have to, but just because it's so busy up there. Whereas I can get away from people if I float downriver. You pay your due, you spend your time there, you'll find the fish. They're not everywhere as you get down lower. You have to spend your time and look for them. But once you start dialing in your memory, I think I always tell people the biggest thing and the best thing you can have as a fishing guide or a float fishing guide, especially, is your memory of that river and every little nook and cranny. And even when it's high water, the river looks completely different. But if you remember that little nook and why those fish are in there and at low water, and you get your flies over there, a good chance there's a fish in it, or they're going to be close to there, so they might be not in the nook because it's too much water, but they're over by the bank, so they can escape to there. So, that's part of my thing is just floating the river and floating as many miles as possible and getting as much memory of the river as as I can. And then if you get that dialed and you find those fish, you're going to be successful, I think.
Do you think it's underrated in a lot of ways just because of the other water around? It can be so good, like you got all these. I mean, Colorado has some amazing waters, right? And
yeah,
then it's like you go, oh, the Colorado, it's kind of like a given, right?
right.
But it's
I hear a lot. I feel like it's underrated for a lot of reasons. One is Denver, the proximity to a large city. People always poo-poo on that, and then I think it's also a misunderstood river as far as the clarity. And I can't tell you how many times I've talked to like friends of mine that float there all the time, and I tell them like what to use and not to change flies, and then I talk to them and how much they're changing flies and really not doing the techniques I'm doing. I'm like, and then they're having bad days, and I'm like, well, if you slow down and have confidence in your flies and like really dissect the river, you're gonna have a great day. And so I think it's just a misunderstood river. It's when it's muddy, it's people just like, oh man, it's muddy and high, and it that throws people off. And then we have the Roaring Fork, the Eagle, we have a bunch of other fisheries here. But even then, I think, a lot of people steer, up to Montana. And the funny thing is I talked to a client the other day, and he was like, look, man, I've been fishing around the world. And he's like, I can tell you, he's like, the Colorado is just as good, if not better than some of the Montana rivers. So to me, I was like, great, and
validation.
Yeah. And it's super cool. Like you can get Western Colorado and it's completely different. There's not as many fish counts, but man, it's super cool in some of those areas down there. Herds of elk and nobody down there. So
give us some examples of those scenarios you had mentioned with your buddies, like changing flies and whatnot.
Obviously, there's days like yesterday I did some swapping out just to check what was going on because there was a little change in the action as we got into the afternoon. But I usually just have a handful of flies and patterns that I use, so, changing all the time, isn't necessarily the right choice. It's maybe if refining your skills or refining your drift or refining where you're fishing, or your depth. So a lot of times, especially in the Colorado, I don't feel like they're super picky. You can as long as you get it to fly to the fish or where they're fit, where they are, those fish will eat. Maybe not all of them. Maybe some of the fish are keying in on blue wings or whatever is out there,
Hmm.
but the other fish will be like, yeah, I'll eat that Pats, or I'll eat that worm, or I'll eat that Prince Nymph. So I just feel like you just need to slow down a little bit and refine your presentation. And once you
Yeah.
do that, you'll be getting into those fish
Well,
because
it
it's not
sounds,
super tricky.
yeah, sounds more like zone concentration versus food concentration.
Most definitely. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Hmm. Hmm. So when you're floating, give us kind of your breakdown. How do you like to manage your boat, and where do you like your guys to fish, and how are you kind of feeling like that's a little different? Because when we first spoke, you'd said fishing the Colorado from a boat's a little bit different than some other areas and or
Yeah.
techniques.
Yeah. I mean, I think slow is key. Obviously, I think for most float fishing, slow is key. Um, and then the biggest thing is slowing down. Like right now, got a lot of water, so you got to find the slow banks and really go slow and work those banks and you're going to lose flies. You're going to put it in the bushes because you got to get real close to those banks. But the other thing, not to to mix up that day, and I'd say maybe 50% of your fish are found turning into eddies, whether it's fishing the back eddy along the bank or fishing the eddy line as it's coming off the point, or fishing the little toilet bowl where the eddies swirling. So really working those eddies is going to get you half your fish. Now that takes some time. Like yesterday we did a pretty long drift. I would have liked to done some more eddy fishing, but we were just running out of time, so
Mm-hmm.
we were kind of mixing it up. Um, and fishing the slow banks, fishing the eddies. But really, most of the time, when you're having a hard day, it's getting in those eddies and fishing
Yeah.
those eddy lines.
And
And other
and
than
the,
that, just going slow and picking the water up. I think again back to that memory, like finding little spots. Like some of my friends say, I'm just like the dink and dunker. I just like find I know the little spots and dink, get a fish there, get a fish there, just these little spots, and not necessarily spending massive time in one area or just getting them on the roll. It's a lot of that dinking and dunking and trying to, find every little fish, every little spot. And that's also too, like sometimes you find those little spots that people don't fish, then that fish doesn't see flies very often and they're going to be more apt to eat your pattern. So when you're fishing where everybody else is, they're going to be like, nope, I've seen that Pats. I know that fly, whereas you get
yeah.
these little seams and little troughs and all that kind of stuff, and again, low water gives you an opportunity to see all those things. I always tell people too, like when it's low in September, take note, and remember those little spots where you're catching those fish.
Yeah, the substrate and whatnot, and how the undercurrents are that you can't see at high water, stuff like that. Do you also find yourself kind of pushing through water because the river so well? Like, hey, I know we're going to have 3 or 4 eddy lines coming up. Let's just reel up here for a second. I'm going to push through. We're not going to fish this like everybody else. We're going to get to those seams and work them, kind of thing.
100%. And, it's a percentage thing for me too. I'm like, yeah, we could sit here and work this water forever and maybe catch a fish. But if I push through this lake and get to that next little seam, I know there's a fish there and we're going to have a way better chance of catching fish. So
Mm-hmm.
I'm doing that consistently throughout the day, just not spending time in certain areas and just pushing through and going to the next spot and then spending a little more time in that next spot,
Mm-hmm.
making sure some spots you're like, yeah, I know this counts for 3 fish. Some spots you're like, it's just 1 fish or whatever. But making sure you're getting those spots. And
Yeah.
again, that back to that memory of that river, of being like, yep, this is low probability of me catching a fish here, but down there, high probability. So
Mm-hmm. So, we got a lot of guys that I think um, they've either floated on a trip or they're experimenting with early, like novice oarsmen, right? Is the way I would describe them. Guy like me who, I'm not a guide, right? I can be an oarsman. I can float a river and put people on fish, etc. But there are some specific things um, correlated to getting into the eddy and floating it right and positioning the boat and whatnot. Can you kind of walk us through, like, I think back to my kayak days, like, hey, how do you cross the eddy line? Where do you want your boat positioned so you don't spook the fish before you go back up the eddy and fish it, and just kind of walk through what you're thinking about. I think that might be kind of helpful for us.
Yeah, I mean, ferry angles are key. You don't want to be working against the current, so making sure you're kind of like that. I guess a good rule of thumb would be like 45-degree angle. Across the current, just going to move a lot easier. Biggest thing, like right now, we got tons of volume. So like yesterday, you know, the safety talk to my clients was like, hey, you make sure you have those leg braces. So because when we cross heavy eddy lines after coming into that slow water, or whether it's going out of the slow water into the other one, you're going to hit that and possibly have to brace,
Hit that.
and
Yeah.
yeah. And then, like the biggest thing with that too is like when you're a new oarsman and you hit that eddy line, if you're not used to using your oars to help counterbalance you, that's something you really need to work on, is learning how to use those oars to counterbalance, and vice versa, not getting those oars stuck in a scenario where they actually catch and or could potentially flip you. So,
Right.
minding those oars, whether it's for a counterbalance situation that's going to help you, and or minding them so it doesn't hurt you. And it can hurt you in a lot of ways, whether it's flipping the boat or just straining your arm or whatnot. I
Mm-hmm.
actually, yesterday I had one where it was a scenario where I think I had to help the client with something, and it made me get my oar stuck. And all of a sudden I was like, oh man, I'm working against this current. It's hurting that elbow,
Right.
and I was able to clear it, really quickly. But high volume, get those ferry angles correct. Don't work against that current. Watch out for those eddy lines as you come through them. They're going to push different water and potentially cause issues. I'm in a drift boat. More issues in a drift boat. But a raft will bust through those eddy lines a little easier. And then mind your oars. Whether it's helping you get across the river or helping you go through and brace yourself as you run across the eddy line.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, learning oar control is so cool too, because you can do these things when it's so cool when you're crossing a current and you can stick an oar in and almost just like surf and just feel how you're just planing with that oar
Yeah.
or trailing. It's super cool. So I'd say that was one of the biggest things, learning those boat angles and learning how to use your oars.
Yeah.
It's a really cool experience once you learn how to do them.
Yeah. It's a unique skill. I think people underappreciate it just because they don't know. There's no education around it, right? You go
Right.
out with a guide, and then you go out with a guy who doesn't really know how to row for fish. I'll use the example of someone who's really good on the oars, a rafter. I got a
Right.
buddy, he's a raft guy. He's solid on the oars, put a boat anywhere, but he doesn't understand how to control the boat to manage the drift.
Right. Yep.
And that's a huge, huge difference between the two ways of rowing. And I like how you talked about using the oars, using the oars, using the oars, because there's a way to describe that that's, I think, a little different, in that when we say use the oars, it's using the power of the river with the oar, not
Yep.
manhandling the oar and trying to control the river. And there's so many, when I first started, I remember, I wanted to get that oar in there and, just yoke on it and really power the boat. And the reality is once you get good, you're really kind of like dipping the oar and you're using the current to push the oar. And the oars are actually almost a little more static in nature. And then it's like, oh, I'm going to make a little movement to adjust that, but I'm using the power of the river to aid me in that. And boy, does that make a difference on your back and arms for
Yeah.
for the
Yeah.
day. So
Yeah. Yeah, I liken it to like big wave surfers who use paddle boards, and you see them as they're in a barrel or something, and you see how they're utilizing that paddle. And that's basically, they're helping that paddle's helping them be in position on the wave. And you can kind of do that similar if you think about it that way with those oars. So it's pretty neat. And
yeah,
once you get good at it, it's a game changer for sure.
yeah. I remember a friend of mine when I was kayaking when I was first starting, and he had always said to me, it was like one of those trigger moments, and he said, "Look, you never want your boat going the same speed as the river. You want to either be going faster or slower. That means you have some level of control and can utilize the river." That was always a good trip for me in kayaking. Do you feel the same way about that in a drift boat?
Yeah. Yeah, I would say so, unless you're trying to peace out.
Yeah,
get to,
exactly.
get to the end.
Even
Yeah,
then, you're
no,
still
yeah,
going. You're rowing. You're pushing.
yeah, 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 true, true.
That's awesome. All right. So, with Colorado, dry fly fishing, you're doing a lot of dry dropper? What about streamers and things like that? What are some of the different techniques that you like to use in that scenario?
Yeah, I mean, Colorado's a great streamer fishing river. I don't really use a sinking line just because most of the time it's a little more work than you need to. I do use a sinking leader though, so I'll
Hmm.
usually use that 7 to 12 foot sinking leader. Usually that's more geared into that 7 to 10 foot, and then gonna tie some like a tippet ring or a swivel, and then a little 0x or 2x. Colorado's got a bunch of color in, so you don't really have to worry about your tippet, and for most situations with streamers, you don't really have to worry about tipping anyway. If they're going to smash it, they're going to smash it. So,
Yeah.
and then a lot of times you can definitely catch fish, especially on the lower Colorado, out of on the western slope, out of the middle of the river. And there's some really nice fish down there. But a lot of times in the upper sections, fish in the banks, fish in the pockets, any little banks, pulling across the current lines. I'm a big fan of hit the bank and then strip, 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 about 3 or 4 strips, and look for your next pocket. So, it's a little more physical fishing because you're doing a lot of casting. Um, I can't tell you very often that I'm fishing with clients that way, just because most people, they'll tire really quickly. But if I get a streamer junkie, for sure, they're going to be doing that. So a little more active. I'll vary in the techniques and see if we're finding fish as they're getting closer to the boat. But most of the time, it's about 4 or 5 strips, and look for your next spot. So, and just basically crossing those same current lines that you would be fishing a dry dropper on, and just looking for that flash, looking for that fish to follow, and chow your fly.
Hmm. Hmm. You're dry fly fishing there. What's your favorite time of year or hatch that you really kind of look forward to?
Yeah. Um, the Colorado doesn't have the massive blanket hatches that everybody wants to see. I mean, maybe down on the western slope you see some good yellow sallies and caddis, and we do have a good caddis hatch, which is usually a little earlier than this, so when you have the best opportunities, and that can be fun. But honestly, some of the best days of dry fly fishing you're going to find is the blue wing olive hatches, and it's really fall's great, and then but spring can be great, and really you're just looking for any crappy days. Yesterday we had a little blue wing olive hatch happen, and even with that clarity, it was cool to see how many fish were came alive as soon as those bugs were on the water and
Hmm.
were chowing them, and yet we had just pulled in for lunch and had been fishing these certain areas and hadn't seen any fish until that hatch started coming off. So blue wing olives are probably my favorite. Looking for a crappy day, and you'll be so surprised when you've fished that river for so many times and come to a hole and you're like, there's a couple hundred fish rising in here.
Yeah.
And I catch one here once in a while. Like, there's a lot of fish, a lot more fish. So that's a super fun scenario. But good chance you're gonna get wet and cold that day. But I've had some
Right.
of the best wet and cold dry fly fishing for blue wings than any other. So
Yeah. When you're fishing blue wings there, um, let's describe your setup. What size blue wings do you guys typically see? I know around here we get super small, in our 20s and stuff, and it's hard
yeah,
to see.
right.
Um,
Yesterday they were like 16s. They were pretty big. I mean, in the
okay.
fall when it's a little colder, they'll be a little smaller. But most of the time, if I'm lucky, I get a good angler with good eyesight and they can fish a single dry, but usually it's a double dry scenario. So like a big 12 parachute Adams, and then try to match that hatch with a 16 blue wing olive behind there, a little CBC beta stun or
Yep.
something like that, extended body blue wing olive or something like that. Or even just a 16 parachute Adams. I mean,
Yeah.
ultimately you don't have to be super tricky unless they're being real picky. So
Yeah. Yeah. I like that scenario too. A lot of times what I'll do around here is because they get so small is same kind of thing. I'll bump up to like an 18 and then I'll fish like a 20 or 22. That's a cripple,
yeah,
off the back, and it seems to work pretty well. I like that. But I got bad eyes, so I need all the help I can get too.
yeah, yeah.
Well,
And
let's do this. Go ahead. You were going to say something?
I was going to say, and of course, we got the salmon fly hatch that just happened.
Hmm.
There's still a few more, and they're going upriver. They're not necessarily like I think we had a couple eats on a big chubby yesterday, but that can be really good. This year was a little stifled with the cold weather, but some years, I mean, this year was clear. It didn't you didn't see the numbers. So, but it's a tough one on the Colorado, the salmon fly hatch.
Yeah, it's pretty short windowed.
Yeah, very short window. Like I said, this week they should be up in Byers Canyon. You can wade fish up there. It's a good opportunity.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it's kind of like that most places, right? It's a flash in the pan kind of scenario, and if you hit it right, it can be amazing. The one thing that's really, I think, nice about salmon flies is, um, you can get into that and miss it, but then you can go out and, like you said, fish a girdle bug or something off the back of something, and still be really successful because they're still kind of feeding on that kind of scenario.
Yeah, we gotta have another month of that. So I'm pretty excited. I mean, yesterday was a little slow on that. I think just because of the cold water, but as we warm back up again, it's been cold and rainy here for the last week or so. It's been cold and rainy for the last month and a half, actually.
Yeah.
So once that starts warming up again, it'll be game on here. And usually this next month and a half is like some of my favorite fishing of the year on Colorado.
Hmm. Hmm. Cool. Let's jump in the last section about your dry dropper rig. You just talked a little bit about fishing dry dropper, whatnot, but you have a technique that you like to use or a setup that you like to use that really allows you to fish pretty deep. So go ahead and fire into that.
Yeah, I just call it like shallow water nymphing. Basically, it's just what the dry dropper technique. So with a big chubby or a big attractor dry fly, and then about 3 to 4 feet of dropper tag to this time of year it's a Pat's rubber leg because there's a or something or a big stone, and then trailing like a Prince nymph. For yesterday it was a Prince or a sandlong worm, and that's about 16 inches off there. So basically you're getting down 3 4 feet. You can fish some shallows. It's easy to cast, short leader to your dry fly, 6 7 feet, 3x or 2x tippet, to be
Hmm.
honest. And you got that big chubby. It's fun for the clients to fish and look at, and it's fun for me to look at as a guide. I don't
Yeah.
really love looking at bobbers, and I don't really love, retying super snaggy nymphing rigs this time of year. So
Hmm.
for me, it's just a little more fun, and I can still fish, deeper, heavy currents, and fish the bank. I can do a little everything. Yeah, middle of winter, I'm definitely going to be nymphing just because that dry fly will ice up, and then it's not really worth it. So the indicator is going to fish better. But this time of year, and even I'll start trying it in March just to see if it works and just see where those fish are. So for me, it's a little less work as far as tying flies on, and it's a little more fun to fish, and it has great success.
Yeah.
And it's easier for the clients to fish. Sometimes a bobber rig is super hard for clients to cast and figure out. And this, you always have that opportunity or chance, even when there's no big bugs out. All of a sudden, the fish will eat the chubby. It's kind of insane.
Right. Right. Do you so you got, like you said, 6 or 7 feet of 3x to your chubby or your hopper, whatever it
Mhm.
is. Excuse me. And then do you tie off the eye or off the bend typically at that point for your nymphs?
I typically tie off the bend. I've just found in my experience, and there's a good argument against. Some people say they have more tangles off the bend. Some people say it off the eye. My experience is off the bend of the hook is better.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe that last fly I might tie off the eye, but usually it's still off the bend of the hook.
Mm-hmm.
About the only time that I'm using eye to eye presentations is in still water situations. So.
Okay. And then you're down to, do you like your first bug to be a bigger, heavier than your point fly?
Yeah, most definitely. That first dropper is going to be the heaviest one. That's the fly you want to get down bouncing on there, and then that last fly is going to be maybe a flashback or a Prince nymph or something that looks like it potentially could have a merge. Doesn't have to be an emerger, but like it's like we've got caddis hatches right there hatching right now. We got blue wings, so having some kind of flash on there, and that fly is going to ride a little bit higher than that heavy bottom nymph, and so you'll be able to see, maybe entice them even on the swing and eat that flashy fly as it's kind of higher in the water column.
Yeah. So you're letting that point fly kind of just flop around back there and rise, and okay, more like an emerging bug than
Yeah,
anything is what you're trying to
yeah,
imitate.
yeah.
Do
It doesn't
you
have to be an emerger, but sure. That's a lot of times of what I'm fishing on the end.
Yeah, what you're maybe trying to represent in a lot of ways in a
Yeah.
different column. And do you find a lot of times people get hit on the lift for the next cast, in that scenario?
Yeah, I mean, that sure happens. And like, that I always tell people, like, especially if you see it happen once, I'm like, okay, when you're getting ready to cast, lift very, very slowly for the first couple feet of your lift, and
And
then you can accelerate.
yeah,
But a lot of times they'll eat on that slow little lift, and when there's magic days like that, it's insane. Like
yeah,
you can catch like on every lift, and yeah, so a lot of times it's just a little slow lift, and bam, it's kind of crazy. So that's one of my favorite when I'm fishing. It's one of my favorite techniques is to do that. So.
yeah. I love that little approach. I do that a lot, where especially in the swinging scenario too. You do that slow lift, and then it's like a set cast. For your neck,
Mm-hmm.
like I'm gonna slow lift, and then I'm gonna set cast, and all of a sudden you're like you go for that set, and it's I don't know what it is, that little bit of
Yeah,
trigger, and boom, you're like, okay, I got one on. That's
yeah,
a really fun day, like you said, because it can be pretty predictable once it starts
sure,
happening.
most definitely.
Yeah. Um, all right. So you got this dry dropper scenario. Let's talk a little bit. Sometimes that could be kind of tough to get close to banks and things like that. How do you help anglers with, putting it in the right place when it's tight spots? And do you change angles? What recommendations do you have there?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of times I'm changing the angle of the boat, or making sure they're casting correctly for that bank. Whether it's if they're in the front of the boat and you're fishing the right bank, not coming over their right shoulder and through the middle of the boat, and making sure they're doing a backhand and almost putting a reach cast already in there. So just helping them with that. I mean, it was definitely challenging yesterday in a few scenarios because you have to fish so tight to the bank. But trying to help them with the boat angles as well.
So
If
you're
I need
having
to,
them cast more parallel to the bank versus
yeah, I
that
mean,
45, 35 angle. Like as
yeah,
close as I can get into the bank and reach out and just keep your
yeah,
line in the same current. All those
yeah,
scenarios that you would in a waiting situation, but maneuvering the boat and helping them position there.
yeah,
Okay.
and getting them to high stick right away too. That's always a helpful thing, especially if we're usually going pretty slow along the bank, and you're fishing pretty close to yourself, so you can use those high stick scenarios once you get in there. If need be, if we're just snagging, and I'll fish to fish one fly,
Mm-hmm.
and just that's a little easier technique, or maybe shorten the dropper, especially if that's where we're catching fishes along the bank, and you don't need a 3 foot dropper. You can get away with two. Sometimes that's a little easier.
If you go to a single dropper, do you have a preference typically on which to keep, the heavy or the maybe even switch to a smaller fly, but a little heavier? What's your kind of mental process there?
That's a tough
I'm
call.
sure it's day
Just
to
kind of
day, but
most definitely day to day. If I was yesterday, I know we were getting some on the pat, so I probably just kept fishing the single dry. In fact, we did start one of my clients with just a single dry because of she was a beginner, and I didn't want to stress her out with 3 flies, and then she was able to graduate to the 3 fly rig.
hmm
But like if you I think it would be just from the experience of the day, what do you think is getting eaten the most? And if
yep.
it was Prince Nymph, you could upsize that Prince Nymph to a little bigger one and hope that is sinking enough. But if they're that active on the Prince Nymph an emerging situation, you could just use that and not really worry about how fast it sinks because they're probably eating it as an emerger anyways. So
hmm
maybe downsize your tippet just to have it sink a little easier. But might lose a lot more flies that way too. So
You're pretty confident on the river, and you're there day to day, et cetera. So you have a lot of clues that kind of kick you off for the day. Do you still use the practice of like, hey, I've got two anglers on the boat. I'm going to put them on a slightly different setup, bug wise or whatever it is, than the person up front, et cetera, just to feel it out for a bit. And then once we start getting into fish, I might, batch them up or whatever. Do you still do that, or are you just so confident now, like, hey, I know this river inside and out, and I know this is what's going on. I'm going to just get them set up and go.
I definitely vary it for my first rig of the day. I vary in flies just to see, I have a good idea what I think is going to work, but then or what I like this time of year, and I'll throw variations in there, especially on that last point fly, and to see what works best.
Mm-hmm.
And even as we get later in the season, I'll vary all the two nips for sure, and maybe a different color chubby or something. So yeah, I definitely vary to start, and then dial it in once you're like, oh, that's the key, the key. They're eating that. Let's make both rigs like that. So
Right. And then it also sounds like from what we talked about at the beginning, before you do that, you probably even adjust the zone length, et cetera, before like, okay, we're going to change flies scenario.
yeah, yeah. I mean, usually starting out, I'm kind of same lengths and everything, but I'll definitely be taking clues throughout the day, seeing what's going on, or when if they can cast it well, if they're dealing with that well. As we get later in the season, when it gets clearer water, that dropper goes down, colder water when we get into the fall. That first dropper is going to be more like that 3 to 4 feet for sure, just to get down to those fish. So this time of year it's about 3 feet. So
Yeah.
not as long as it could be, but I don't need to go real deep. It's too hard to cast.
Yeah, it gets unwieldy, and then like you said, you're not even getting the bug in the water, right? It's like you're dealing. So, well, cool, Zeke. Man, hey, that was really good talking through that. Getting a lot of good tips in there, some little nuggets, and hearing the story about the tarpon and whatnot, and excited to hear some more here in the near future. Appreciate you coming on the show, man. You definitely caught us up on the Colorado, and got me a little excited to come out there and check it out. Do some Colorado Western fishing, man. Get, all kinds of different techniques in there.
Come out and go fishing, man. To everybody, get out here to Colorado. It's a great state for fishing, great state for weather. Yeah, give me a call, give me a visit. Love to get you out or talk to you about some good fishing techniques and fishing opportunities.
Yeah, and you guys can reach Zeke right through Trout's Fly Fishing Shop. So reach out, give him a jingle, even if you just have questions, right? I mean, I know you're all for that. You've helped me in some scenarios too. So thanks everyone for listening. We'll see you next week.